From Grizzly Smith, whose daughter later came forward and revealed years of misconduct.
You were molested as a child,
Right.
with your father Grizzly. When did that start?
What I remember was probably around 6.
From Buck Zumhofe, who was later imprisoned for incest, to Marty Jannetty, who once made a shocking claim about being involved with his own daughter, these are wrestlers who crossed a line no one should ever cross with their own children, starting with Grizzly Smith, who stood at 6'10" and weighed around 350 pounds. A territorial giant of the 1960s and 1970s, whose presence cast a dark shadow over wrestling just as much as it did over his own family, as he fathered several children, including sons Jake the Snake Roberts and Sam Houston, along with daughters Rockin' Robin and Jolene. And it was not until the Dark Side of the Ring Season 3 episode titled In the Shadow of Grizzly Smith that the truth the family had kept hidden for decades finally came out, revealing a deeply disturbing home environment built on abuse that targeted his daughters from a very young age, with Robin later sharing that her abuse began when she was only around 8 years old.
I remember was probably around 6, 7 years old. People that have that problem, the whole thing is, that it's about young children.
Her father followed a clear pattern of manipulation, where he would withdraw for about a month, ignoring her and making her feel invisible and worthless, and then suddenly return with intense affection and attention, and it was during one of these shifts that the abuse began, continuing over a period of 6 years until she reached the age of 14.
Oh, you're seeing this big 7-foot man. He's so, he's bigger than life. Not only is, he your father, but he's a bigger than life figure.
And it wasn't, it wasn't just...
Robin was not the only daughter affected by his manipulation, as her sister Jo Lynn was later kidnapped and murdered under circumstances that led some family members to hold deep suspicions about their own father. And as the situation grew more troubling, Robin's mother eventually began to realize something was wrong and sat her down to ask the most difficult and painful question a parent can ask a child.
Finally, my mother had a suspicion about it, and she sat me down and she asked me, is there anything you want to tell me? He ruined enough of my life. He ruined my childhood.
They left him soon after, and at just 15 Robin confronted him directly, warning that she would shoot him with his own gun if he ever touched her again. And although she later became a WWF Women's Champion, the emotional and psychological damage from those years had already shaped her childhood. And when she chose to speak out decades later on Dark Side of the Ring, it was not about tearing down his wrestling legacy, but about reclaiming her truth and exposing the reality of what happened. And from one deeply troubled household, the story shifts to another wrestling figure whose actions followed a different but equally disturbing path, as Buck Rock and Roll Zumhofe, whose real name was Eugene Otto Zumhofe, made a name for himself in the AWA and had brief appearances in the WWF during the 1980s, but his most serious actions took place away from the spotlight, as he had multiple children from different relationships, including a daughter from a one-night encounter, and he had no contact with her until she was around 13. Then at 15 he persuaded her to move into his home in Minnesota, and on the very first night she stayed there in June 1999 the abuse began, and later AWA veteran Greg Gagne shared that he had long held concerns, recalling an uncomfortable backstage moment involving Zumhofe and his associate Jim.
Jim said to me, geez, I hope, she was like 15 or 16, I hope Buck isn't doing something with his daughter.
What happened inside that Minnesota home continued for years and followed a pattern of sustained abuse, with court testimony later revealing that she endured a very large number of repeated criminal acts, including sexual assault and coercion, lasting until June 2011 when she was 27 years old, married, and finally able to escape the situation, and according to later accounts, Greg Gagne recalled receiving a phone call from the daughter herself in which she shared the full extent of what had been happening, confirming the long-held suspicions about the abuse.
She never did tell me until one night she called me on the phone and said, I can't stand it anymore.
The manipulation she experienced was extremely calculated, as she was led to believe that the abuse was somehow her fault, that she was responsible for it, and even that her father was the one being wronged, and over time she took on a role in the household that blurred boundaries while still to live a normal life by finishing high school and later attending the University of Minnesota Morris where she earned a degree, all while carrying this secret alone for years until 2012 when, during marriage counseling, she finally told a pastor what had been happening, and that moment set everything in motion, leading to Zumhofe's arrest in May 2013, his conviction on multiple felony counts in March 2014, and a sentence of more than 25 years in prison. But as the narrative shifts forward, the next wrestling figure drew attention in a completely different way. Not through a courtroom case, but through a viral social media post, as Marty Jannetty, known as one half of the Rockers. alongside Shawn Michaels, had built his reputation during the 1980s and 1990s with high-flying performances and a chaotic personal image outside the ring. In 2014, a woman named Bianca contacted him claiming to be his biological daughter from a past relationship, and he accepted the connection, with the two beginning what he believed was a genuine father-daughter relationship. But in late August 2017, a post appeared on his verified Facebook account that quickly spread across the wrestling internet, where it stated that a DNA test had reportedly shown she was not his daughter and included language that caused widespread controversy, including a question about whether a romantic or sexual relationship would now be acceptable, and the post went viral within hours, being covered by outlets such as the New York Post, International Business Times, and Bleeding Cool, with screenshots circulating widely online, and Bianca suddenly finding herself at the center of intense public attention and discussion she did not seek, while Marty Jannetty immediately denied authoring the post and claimed his account had been hacked, a position he has repeated in later interviews, including appearances on Hannibal TV, where he described a late-night phone call connected to the incident and maintained his version of events.
I got a call in the middle of the night, and somebody said, "Take that down, Marty, take that down."
He insisted that he had no memory of making the post and said that it was friends who first brought it to his attention, claiming he only became aware of it after it had already started spreading online.
Call in the middle of the night, man, take that down. You know, because I post some things that, you know, not everybody will post that.
Whether the post was authentic or the result of a hacked account, the fallout affected Bianca the most, as a young woman in her early 20s who had reached out hoping to find her biological father suddenly found her identity pulled into a viral controversy and her name and image widely circulated online in a way that stripped away her privacy, and after that moment she largely disappeared from public view. But while that situation unfolded in a single online incident, the next case being referenced involves a far more long-running and nationally visible controversy centered around Hulk Hogan, whose real name is Terry Gene Bollea, one of the most recognizable figures in wrestling history whose Hulkamania persona helped define the industry during the 1980s and beyond. Hulk Hogan's daughter, Brooke Hogan, was born in 1988, and much of her early adult life was shown on the VH1 reality series Hogan Knows Best from 2005 to 2007, which portrayed Hogan as a highly protective and controlling father who was heavily involved in her dating life and music career, although Brooke later described that environment as more intense and restrictive than it appeared on television, saying it limited her independence in real ways behind the scenes. And the situation took a far more serious turn in 2015 when a previously recorded sex tape involving Hogan leaked publicly, which included audio of him making racist remarks, including repeated use of racial slurs and comments about his daughter's relationships, which sparked widespread backlash and led to major professional consequences for him, while Brooke, who was in her late 20s at the time, was caught off guard by the public exposure and the controversy surrounding her family, and Hogan later acknowledged the damage and expressed regret, although the incident remained one of the most damaging moments of his public life and reputation.
Through so much stuff, but never have I ever been this embarrassed, and never has my world been turned upside down in such a fashion.
Brooke's personal life was heavily affected by the public fallout, as the controversy surrounding Hulk Hogan also impacted her relationships and added intense public scrutiny to her private life, including her connection with unique Stax Barker, which became strained during the backlash, and she also later had to process additional family complications, including reports involving an alleged affair between her father and Christiane Plant, who worked around the time of her 2006 music project and later acknowledged the relationship and reportedly apologized to Brooke. And in later interviews, Brooke has spoken about trying to protect the more personal and peaceful parts of her life from the public chaos surrounding her family, emphasizing how deeply the media attention affected her sense of privacy and stability.
I was like, the one thing that feels like it's just so untouched and it's so pure, I was like, I just don't want to, let the claws of fame sink its teeth into, my...
She eventually skipped her father's 2023 wedding, reportedly asked to be removed from his will, and stepped away from both parents to protect her own emotional well-being. And from what was once a highly public family struggle, the narrative shifts into a very different kind of controversy inside the wrestling industry, centered on Vince McMahon, the creator of WWE, and his on-screen persona Mr. McMahon, who has often blurred the line between real-life authority and scripted character, while his daughter Stephanie McMahon grew up inside that environment and eventually became a key executive in the company. And although she has spoken positively about many aspects of her career under his leadership, there have also been moments she described as deeply uncomfortable, including a widely reported storyline pitch from the mid-2000s during her real-life pregnancy, where it was suggested that her on-screen character be involved in an angle implying that Vince's character could be the father of her unborn child, or that other close family members could be used in the storyline if she refused, a concept she ultimately rejected, and she later reflected on how unsettling that idea was, with the situation also being discussed years later in public documentaries where Vince McMahon himself acknowledged the pitch in describing the creative process, highlighting how extreme WWE storytelling ideas sometimes became when reality and fiction were pushed too closely together.
My dad did approach me about wanting to be the father of my baby in a storyline for TV, which again is only the second time I've ever actually said no to him for something he wanted.
She went further and explained that the concept felt deeply uncomfortable and inappropriate because it crossed a clear personal boundary, blending real family relationships and her real pregnancy with an on-screen storyline in a way that made it feel invasive rather than purely fictional.
And that one was just a little too gross, actually. It's completely disgusting, and I don't find the entertainment value in it at all. And he's actually my father.
Stephanie explained that the idea was unacceptable because it would have required her to act out a storyline involving a romantic or parental implication with her own father on television, which she felt was completely inappropriate and not something she was willing to portray.
How could I even play that out? I can't fake kiss my dad like we were in love or something. I mean, it's just revolting all the way around.
The second moment was physical and took place as part of an on-screen storyline at Vince McMahon's WWE No Mercy 2003 I Quit match against his daughter Stephanie McMahon, where the angle portrayed Vince as an abusive authority figure using extreme scripted aggression in the ring until the match was stopped when Linda McMahon threw in the towel, presenting a dramatic storyline of family conflict designed for television rather than real-life harm, and from a corporate world built on that kind of boundary-pushing storytelling. The narrative then shifts to a very different environment in Canadian wrestling history, centered on Stu Hart, the legendary promoter who founded Stampede Wrestling and trained many major stars in his famous dungeon training system, including Bret Hart and Owen Hart, where he is widely respected for his contribution to wrestling but also associated with a very strict and intense household environment in Calgary, as some members of the Hart family have described his parenting style as extremely harsh and have raised allegations of emotional and physical abuse within the family, creating a complicated legacy that mixes admiration for his wrestling influence with criticism of his methods at home. The second moment was physical and took place as part of an on-screen storyline at Vince McMahon's WWE No Mercy 2003 I Quit match against his daughter Stephanie McMahon, where the angle portrayed Vince as an abusive authority figure using extreme scripted aggression in the ring until the match was stopped when Linda McMahon threw in the towel, presenting a dramatic storyline of family conflict designed for television rather than real-life harm, and from a corporate world built on that kind of boundary-pushing storytelling. The narrative then shifts to a very different environment in Canadian wrestling history, centered on Stu Hart, the legendary promoter who founded Stampede Wrestling and trained many major stars in his famous dungeon training system, including Bret Hart and Owen Hart, where he is widely respected for his contribution to wrestling but also associated with a very strict and intense household environment in Calgary, as some members of the Hart family have described his parenting style as extremely harsh and have raised allegations of emotional and physical abuse within the family, creating a complicated legacy that mixes admiration for his wrestling influence with criticism of his methods at home. Many members of the Hart family remained connected to wrestling through marriages and careers in the industry, but the strict and intense environment they described growing up in has often been discussed in terms of its long-term emotional impact, including strained relationships and personal challenges that some have later spoken about in interviews and writing. And the narrative then shifts to Ric Flair, one of the most iconic figures in wrestling history, known as the Nature Boy, whose career spanned major promotions like NWA, WCW, and WWE, but whose personal life was heavily shaped by a demanding travel schedule, time away from home, and a well-documented lifestyle that affected his family relationships, while his daughter Charlotte Flair, born Ashley Fleer, has spoken about how growing up as the daughter of a wrestling legend influenced her career and mindset, including her desire to succeed on her own merit rather than rely on her father's legacy, and in her writing she described the internal pressure of building her identity in WWE while managing a complicated personal relationship with him, which evolved over time, especially during moments of his serious health struggles, leading to reflection and a more emotional understanding of their bond.
It's been a really tough year with my dad getting sick. And the only thing I thought about when he was in the hospital was for my dad to see me wrestle again.
She explained that her relationship with her craft and her father followed a very specific daily rhythm, where she was constantly trying to separate her own identity from his legacy while still living in its shadow, and over time she had to learn how to balance personal pressure, professional expectations.
I talk to him every day like, Dad, was this match bad, or was I monotone in my promo?
Despite the emotional difficulties she has spoken about, she has also said that he remained an important part of her life, and that she would still often reach out to him after her matches, showing that even with a complicated history between them, there was still a personal connection she maintained over time.
He's my first phone call to tell me how I did, and to think going further with my career without that message and then making it to Mania.
Stone Cold Steve Austin, born Steve Williams, became one of the defining figures of WWE's Attitude Era, but behind the larger-than-life persona was a personal life shaped by constant travel, multiple marriages, and long periods away from home that affected his relationship with his children, including his daughters Stephanie and Cassidy from his marriage to Jeannie Clark and stepdaughter Jade. And over time, he has openly acknowledged in his autobiography the stone-cold truth that while his children knew he loved them, he was often not physically present during their upbringing due to the demands of wrestling and personal circumstances, and after his divorce the children moved to England with their mother, which created further distance between them, something Austin has reflected on in interviews as deeply emotional moments that made him reconsider his choices as a father, especially when noticing changes in their lives like accents and lifestyles that highlighted how much time had passed while he was away on the road.
Hung up the phone. I started crying like a baby because she used to sound exactly like I.
Hearing them sound like strangers deeply affected him, making him realize how much distance had formed over the years and how much of their childhood he had missed while being on the road.
And to hear her with an English accent, yeah, that shook me up because I was like, okay, you know, what did I do wrong or could have done better?
Stone Cold Steve Austin has spoken about how becoming a stepfather to Jade Clark, who joined the family as a teenager, came with its own challenges. As he has admitted, he was not fully prepared for the responsibilities of raising an older child and initially saw his role more as a stepfather learning as he went, while his daughters, including Jade along with his biological children, grew up without his consistent day-to-day presence due to his demanding wrestling career, long travel schedule, and time spent on the road, meaning they often missed out on regular family routines like shared dinners, school events, and holidays together.
Now that they're older, we're on the way to building better relationships. So now they're pursuing their own things. I support them.
Scott Hall, known in WWE as Razor Ramon and later as a founding figure of the NWO in WCW, was one of wrestling's most charismatic performers, but his personal life was heavily affected by long-term struggles with addiction, repeated rehab attempts, and time away from home, which created instability in his family life, including his children from his marriage to Dana, such as his son Cody and daughter Cassidy. And over the years his substance abuse issues contributed to long absences and unpredictable contact, with periods where communication with his children was inconsistent or limited, especially during times when he was actively struggling, and Dana Hall has spoken publicly about how difficult it was for the family to manage that uncertainty and how the children often grew up adapting to his absence rather than his presence. While Cassidy's upbringing in particular was shaped by financial and emotional instability tied to those struggles, and as a result their childhood experience was marked more by unpredictability than stability, which has been acknowledged in later reflections on his life and legacy. Scott Hall's home life, as described by family accounts, was marked by emotional strain, instability, and long periods of uncertainty tied to his struggles with addiction, with his children growing up around broken routines, missed commitments, and the fear of relapse or disappearance. And his daughter Cassidy and son Cody have largely kept their experiences private, but reports and interviews with family members have suggested that the unpredictability of his condition created emotional distance and a sense of guardedness that carried into their adulthood, even during later periods of sobriety that Hall achieved with support from people like Diamond Dallas Page. And Hall himself has reflected in later years on how addiction affected not only his career but also his ability to be present as a father, acknowledging the generational nature of his struggles and how they shaped his relationships, leaving lasting consequences in terms of trust, stability, and family connection. And from that broader theme of generational struggle, the narrative then transitions to another wrestling figure often associated with similar personal battles, Jake Roberts, whose life story has also frequently been discussed in the context of addiction and its long-term impact on both career and family relationships. Jake Roberts, whose real name is Aurelian Smith Jr., became one of the most influential performers of the 1980s and 1990s, known for his psychological storytelling, the DDT finishing move, and his use of his pet python Damien, but his personal life has often been discussed in connection with long-standing struggles with addiction and a difficult family history tied to his father Grizzly Smith, whose abusive legacy has been widely reported in wrestling documentaries and accounts from family members. And Roberts has spoken openly about how he vowed not to repeat that cycle but later faced his own battles with substance abuse, which affected his ability to maintain consistent relationships with his children, including his daughter Brandy, and by the time of the 1999 documentary Beyond the Mat, it was documented that he had been estranged from her for several years, and the film captured a deeply emotional reunion where both acknowledged the damage caused by years of absence, with Roberts reflecting on the contrast between his intentions as a father and the reality of what had happened, while Brandy expressed a desire for him to change and rebuild their relationship, highlighting the personal cost of addiction and generational trauma within his family. He is shown as emotionally overwhelmed, at one point wondering aloud if there was still time to change things, while also expressing deep regret and repeatedly apologizing in a visibly broken state. And the impact on Brandy and Jake's other daughters is described as profound and long-lasting, rooted in the instability caused by his addiction, with the children growing up in an environment marked by neglect, financial chaos, and emotional absence, where important family moments like birthdays, holidays, and school events were often missed, leaving them without consistent parental guidance. And as a result, the children were forced into emotional self-reliance far earlier than they should have been, carrying the weight of a broken household into adulthood. And even after Jake later achieved sobriety, the damage remained as the daughters had already internalized years of neglect, which went on to shape their trust, relationships, and sense of self-worth, continuing the cycle of generational trauma in ways that were not easily undone.